Hello, everyone. This is Judge Jennifer Brunner, and we're here with our next episode of Achieving Justice. In these series, I'm interviewing judicial candidates from around the state of Ohio. I'm currently a candidate for the Supreme Court of Ohio and currently serving as an appellate judge in the 10th District Court of Appeals in Franklin County. And I'm so glad to be back in Franklin County with a judicial candidate for the Franklin County Common Pleas Court, Andy Miller. Andy, welcome. And I'd like folks to hear a little bit about your extensive litigation and trial background, and also what led you to run for judge.
I don't know which way to start with why I'm running for judge or the background, but I think they both kind of tail into the one leads to the other. I started law school back in 1991 and immediately fell in love with it. Not just as a means to make a living or a career, but as an academic pursuit or an intellectual pastime, a practical philosophy. So much so that I really thought I was going to stay in academia forever. But upon graduation, for my first job out of law school was a clerk for a federal court of appeals judge in Brownsville, Texas. I did that for 1 year and then went to Los Angeles to clerk for another federal judge, but this time on the trial court. After those 2 years of clerking, I returned to Columbus and worked for a multinational law firm downtown. And I was there for about 4.5 years before then going into academia. I taught torts, American legal history, torts to law and education at Loyola New Orleans College of Law. And I taught torts and evidence then at Houston, Texas, South Texas College of Law. After that, and during that second tenure as an assistant professor of law, my wife Ruth and we got pregnant with our first daughter, Adley. She had been such a good sport about letting me drag her around the country while I was pursuing a teaching dream, that I decided it was time to go back home. Once I made that decision, I said, well, if I'm going back into practice, I'm going back into public sector service. And it just so happened to be lucky on this point. My resume hit the desk of Rick Pfeiffer at the exact moment he was looking for a litigator. So the stars aligned, and I've been at the Columbus City Attorney's Office since 2009 as a litigation attorney in their civil litigation center. And that really brings us to why I'm running now. For the last 10 years, I have found a tremendous pride in public service. There's been a real honor in going to work knowing that your time and your energy is being spent for the public good. And I've grown to love that as much as I love the law itself. And so running for judge always seemed like it would be the next logical evolution. And this year just presented a tremendous opportunity to do so. And it just seems like it's the place I need to go to do the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. So that's why I'm running. It feels like that's where I belong.
That's wonderful. Now, so you've been endorsed by the Franklin County Democratic Party. You actually nominated by the county party after the primary, correct?
That's correct.
And I know from experience, because I started out as a common pleas court judge 20 years ago, if you can believe that. But now it is a very competitive process to be recommended by the screening committee and then endorsed by the party. So you didn't just walk into this, you kind of had to prove yourself, didn't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was months of preparation. Honestly, my background before law was quantitative business analysis, economics, and finance. I spent a couple months going over every single judicial race in Franklin County since, I believe, 2000, looking at all the numbers, looking at the paths forward, things way work. It was all to present. The Democratic Party was looking for somebody who had a plan on how to run and the qualifications to do a good job when they got there. And I was very, very honored that they agreed that I had things.
That's wonderful. You and I had a chance to get together, and we talked a lot about first time to run and that sort of thing. But what I was struck by when I talked with you was again what you mentioned, your love for the law. And when we were talking, you said, well, probably a lot of the things I would have to say would be boring, but I really love evidence. And maybe you can talk a little bit about why evidence is important, especially for people who aren't used to being in a courtroom?
Well, I would love to, and I could talk far longer than anybody would care to hear. But the nutshell, I always say, evidence has always been one of my favorite subjects and favorite courses, because it really is the heart of the law. It's evidence is a class, and I used to tell my students this: it's thinking about thinking. What is a logical inference to draw from any given fact? What is something that logically follows? It looks for logical fallacies. It looks for faulty arguments. People have become a big fan lately of we need an increase in critical thinking. And I say the entire evidentiary code is based on the notion of critical thinking. It's all designed for one question: is this piece of evidence, whether it be a document, somebody's testimony, is it reliable? And is it something that a jury should hear and listen to and use when they, or a fact finder, when they make their decisions? So everything springs from that, because our court system is an adversarial process, whether it's civil, whether it's criminal, on the appellate level. Every time it's two parties, or at least two or more opposing parties, each representing their best argument for a particular outcome, their best set of evidence. And the judge's job is to decide first what evidence is acceptable and what needs to be excluded, and then stand back and make sure the jury or the fact finder accurately, is given a fair chance to render a verdict or a decision with which we can have confidence that it wasn't driven by speculation or sympathy or anything other than solid critical thinking. So it's really at the heart of everything we do.
So when the judge makes the rulings on evidence, and that is the judge's job in a trial, I mean, that's a lot of power, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the judge's role as a gatekeeper is one of the primary jobs a trial judge has. And a lot of times you see that role abdicated by a judge or by a judge, because evidence is hard. It's a hard class. It's a hard course. It's a hard subject. But it's an important role, because, like I said, if the judge doesn't perform his or her gatekeeping function and lets in evidence that is unreliable, from which bad decisions can be made, that judge is inviting the jury to make a bad decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And this concept of discretion that judges have, it to me, it's a basis for why we're held to a higher standard of behavior, code of conduct, because of this exercise of discretion that is probably a higher level than the other two branches of government. And the consequences are greater too. Do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we always talk about the judicial discretion, but the fun part is there's still standards to guide the decision in any particular case. But the problem is we can't write rules that apply to anything we can think of ahead of time. Then the judge needs to be able to be flexible when he or she is faced with sort of a novel issue or something about which reasonable minds can differ. And that's where the judge's discretion comes in. Now that discretion, the question is it going to be exercised to what purpose? Is a judge going to, if a judge has his wiggle room, is he or she always going to wiggle one side or another in particular disputes? Or is it going to be the judge is going to use discretion to more often exclude evidence that's problematic? Or are they just going to let things in because I'll call it? There's a lot of, I've known this since I was a clerk watching courts work. Especially trial courts, there's a lot of concern about being reversed. And so sometimes I've seen judges say, well, I know a decision is going to go in this party's favor, so I'm just going to make all evidentiary rulings against that party, because then I'll be protected. The decision will be protected on appeal. And I don't know how much of a service that does. I definitely see the temptation in it. And the discretion gives us some of the power to get away with that. But like I said, the whole reason, purpose why we're here is to get at the truth, or estimation of what the truth might be, and that can only be done if we, rely on reliable evidence.
Sure, because as I've always seen it, um, I have had the good fortune or the misfortune, from whatever point of view somebody would say, to have served as Secretary of State and also to have served as a trial judge and a Court of Appeals judge. But I look at the judiciary and juries and the judiciary and fair elections as two major pillars of democracy. And when you think about it, democracy is kind of a fragile thing. I mean, it's really only as good as what people believe it is. So the role of a judge also includes kind of bolstering people's confidence in that system so that it works.
Absolutely. I always thought democracy, just like the judiciary, it really only as strong as the goodwill of its leaders and goodwill that people put into it. Democracy of, and I'm going to completely blanked on who gave the quote. I want to say Thomas Jefferson, but I could be very wrong. But the idea is that we're not really our democracy isn't really run by a majority. It's run by a majority of people. And if we get down to, 10% participation, 19% participation, is it really even a democracy?
Right.
And same thing in the court system. And we're starting to see some of this. And again, I don't know how long, and I can't guess how long it's been going on, but a politicization of the judiciary, tendency to view the law as just a series of arbitrary rules that are just wielded by powerful, and that has always driven me nuts when I students, because that was the one fun part about teaching first-year students. It was the closest you ever get to 40, 50 lay people coming in and giving you their first impression of what the law is. And it's amazing to me how many times you run into somebody who thinks, well, it's almost like a spell book. If you know the right words and say them in the right order, anything will happen. And the law makes so much more sense than that. And it's been 600 years of Anglo-American jurisprudence have not been for naught. We've come up with pretty good rules to deal with most situations.
Right, right. So speaking of minorities, we had a pretty small minority of people who voted in the primary election. What's your view about absentee voting for the fall?
I think absentee voting for the fall is going to be critical. And I would think it's something we need to start thinking about now, because we don't know what November 3rd is going to look like. We don't know what the conditions on the ground are going to be in November 3rd. We don't know if there's going to be a resurgence, if there's going to be even more strenuous stay-at-home orders, or everything could be fine. The point is, we don't know. And to protect your right to vote, what I've recommended and what I'm doing, my family and I are doing, I'm recommending for everybody is go ahead and apply for your absentee ballot now. So that way, don't wait till the last minute, because then if everybody asks at the last minute, we're just going to be fraught with problems, as every board of elections is deluged with tons of requests all at once. I don't know if in-person voting is going to be an option or even available. And so that is why I'm sort of pushing absentee ballot.
Sure.
And that's weird for me, because I've always been a vote the day of guy.
I'm yeah.
I loved getting up on on election day and going in and voting and then going to work and walking around all day with that. But no, I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm lucky I didn't do it. That didn't happen to me this time around, which it would have if I had been voted the day in the primary, vote on the day in the primary this time, because I decided for the first time to vote in person early voting. So I did get a cast ballot, but yeah.
Sure. And I think, I suspect that we'll have in-person early voting. If I had a crystal ball, I would say I think that will still be in place. I don't know what the legislature is going to do in terms of making it any easier to vote absentee. I know Secretary LaRose has asked for the ability for people to request their ballot online, but so far it's not looking like they're moving in that direction. And even if there is election day voting, I would anticipate there'd still be social distancing, and I think if people want to avoid having to wait in line a long time, and especially in Franklin County where we still have the touchscreen machines that print out our ballot that then we have to go and take and scan, that could slow down the voting process. And, the studies have shown from back when I was in the Secretary of State's office that if people have to wait in line too long, it actually disenfranchises people because either they don't attempt to vote when they see the line or they don't wait in line long enough to be able to vote. So I think you have a great point there. And like I was one of those people that ended up being caught not being able to vote on election day and having to go into a Walgreens and find stamps and do the whole rigmarole. We've talked a lot about really interesting things about the law that I think you've sort of simplified for a lot of people. But your personal life, I think it's interesting because it's not just you and your wife and your oldest. You've got more people living with you now.
Oh yeah, it's the nuclear family is my wife Ruth, my two daughters Hadley and Morgan, and they are 10 and soon to be 9. Constantly reminded. We also live with my mother-in-law Carol. She's been with us for about 5 years now. 2 dogs who I love, 2 cats with whom I'm very indifferent, and my children are 2 of a passel of cousins of about 9. And so very early on in the pandemic, my sister-in-law was a dialysis tech, and she was caring for a COVID patient specifically. We took in her 2 children, my niece and nephew, that full house for a while. So we keep them away from infection. And currently, I have 3 extra children. Again, group of cousins, and they're letting me do this interview by all going to find one.
Well, it's too bad we're not doing parades because you'd have lots of help in parades.
Oh, I have an army. My daughters, they called them Andy-crats. That was what they wanted to start, was a group of Andy-crats.
That's cute.
Well, I was really hopeful for that, and
Yeah.
the parade stopped. So
I know. But so this has just been great. I've really enjoyed talking with you today. So do you want to wrap up with anything you want people to remember? What's your website? How can they help out your campaign?
well, obviously, AndyMillerForJudge.com, FOR. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, which an old man is trying to learn, Twitter, and some videos on YouTube. AndyMillerForJudge.com. And we're, word of mouth. That's what matters in these judicial races. And that's what I want to leave everybody with is judges matter. And traditionally, we see a drop off in our judicial races of 25, 30% of people who show up to vote, but then don't vote for judges. And I ask people why that is, and they tell me, well, they don't know who anybody is. And I'm really hoping to change that this year. I go, me up, happy to share my past, my qualifications with anybody, but judges matter, and I just want people to vote down ballot.
Great. Well, I have so enjoyed this interview today, and I wish you the very best. And whether we see each other in person or on the internet, I know our paths are going to cross. And thank you so much for joining me today. And best of luck November 3rd.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Thanks.